Hi, Nathan.
Hello. Greetings.
You're doing good?
Doing well. It's raining outside.
Yes, I saw. You shouldn't be here, anyone. There's a thunderstorm outside.
Big thunderstorm. Yeah, I didn't know.
Much welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's been kind of overwhelming.
Yes.
Down there. It's been amazing. Nathan, I don't think I need to present Strange Planet right now for people. What I want to right away jump into is one of the greatest strengths of this webcomic, and probably most of what you do is in linguistics. So I really want to delve today in the richness of this. And coming back to 2017, I think you were an editor at BuzzFeed, right?
Yes.
And you know that most of your stuff is still online.
Yeah,
this day.
A lot of it. Yeah.
And so one of the last one, for example, BuzzFeed lists are very much coming from this, I would say, strange tradition of, I don't know, it come from like 2005 or something with Facebook. Right. They were like, we talked about it yesterday with Rob from Cyanide and Happiness, like what kind of carcass are you?
Right.
And so the last one you had was, what kind of toast are you?
Yes.
And another one was, that was the subtitle, are you more of a contemplative onion or a wistful carrot?
Yes, yeah, that's true.
I want to start with that. Was that your first foray, this whole BuzzFeed thing, into, let's say, wordplay or playing with meanings?
Sure.
Or do you have antecedents before that?
No, there were before. When I first started at BuzzFeed, I had written a book about New York City. Before that, I had moved to New York City from the suburbs. I'm not sure if you say suburbs here, but it's basically just, I moved into a very densely populated place, whereas before I was in a very calm place. So I had made this book about New York, thought a lot about how you have to be rude to be kind in New York City, and in any city really. You have to be able to merge with traffic. You have to be able to order your coffee. So when we came here, I was impressed by how relaxed people in Vilnius were, as opposed to New York. They're not very relaxed in New York.
I think there's more people in New York than in whole of Lithuania.
Yes, right. It's a very crowded place. And so I think the reason I'm saying all that is to say it really started then that I was thinking, all right, what does it mean to be rude? What does it mean to be kind? It depends on where you are. And words change meaning over location. So rudeness in New York is actually kindness in a lot of ways, because you're just trying to move along, keep it moving. And that's not how it was where I grew up in Ohio. Ohio is where I grew up. Yeah.
You got a cultural shift that kind of made you much more aware of how human behavior
yes
kind of informs even what kind of word you use.
Right. And here in Lithuania, I've noticed there's this pausing sometimes when you speak. And I think it has a lot to do with many people speaking 2, 3, 4 languages, many languages. How many people in here speak like 3 languages? Oh, 5. Okay, yeah. See, I know there's a lot of people speaking at least 3 languages in here, and I think it creates an interesting dynamic when you're talking, because they're cycling through all these different words in all these different languages, and it creates more pauses that I think are actually very beneficial, good beneficial pauses to speaking. Yeah.
Right. I've been also very. I have 4 languages. I was saying in my own family. And so we start to get more aware of what word means, the limit of one word.
Right.
And if you only have one language, you actually don't really pay attention to the fact that the word itself kind of filters between experience and meaning, or between an idea and what comes out.
Right.
I want to talk about this. So you make this book about New York City, for example.
Yes, yeah.
And I would consider it like reacting, which means you experience something new, and then you reacted upon it.
Yeah.
The same way you made those pigeon videos.
Yes, pigeons, right.
So it's a reaction. I see pigeon, I film pigeon, and then I put something on, put my input.
Yeah, right.
Do you feel that there's a difference between this kind of reaction to stimuli and actually having to create, to world build?
Yes, I think that there is a spectrum of distinction So it's not binary. But I do think our human existence creates a reaction to all things. So we're reacting to this moment right now. If it starts to rain, we suddenly react to that. It changes the way we walk outside. So I think there's always going to be some reaction, even in the most original work. You're reacting. And I think in Strange Planet's case, I made all these comics in 2019 that I stopped posting once 2020 came around because there was a pandemic that started. And some of the jokes were no longer funny. They were very sad. So I decided I have to not post this. There was one where a being was coughing and the other beings saying, you know, are you dying? Are you going to perish? And it felt so much different a year after I wrote it because many people were perishing and it was very real. So that happens.
And the first comic was about inviting people at party at home,
which didn't happen as much.
That didn't age well the next year.
Yeah, that's true.
That's interesting because the success of Strange Planets is actually very much tied to what we called yesterday with Rob, like the third age of the internet, where pandemic and post-pandemic, basically, which is very different era than 2012 or something.
It truly is, right. And truly it's exciting because I went down and talked to Nobody Sausage, the Nobody Sausage creators down there. It's really neat to see what the new internet looks like, what TikTok looks like, and how animation has proliferated. People like them are doing incredible animation on their own. You know, they don't have to have a studio or a team. They're doing it together, and it's really exciting. It's really cool.
Yeah. There was one example that made me think of maybe you would enjoy it. I don't know if you're familiar with the Devon Maid.
A little bit.
I think on TikTok she's dancing, like what kind of dance Pasta is doing. Like what's a cannelloni dance, like what's lasagna dance, and it's pretty funny usually, but it's very much in this like little twist.
Yes.
So, you know, everyday pantry stuff. And then you can make not only like something poetic, definitely, but actual content. Like
Right. And I always like to ask too, what's what are the TikTok accounts that you follow? It's helpful for me to know. So I'm going to say on the count of 3, TikTok that you follow. 1, 2, 3. Is it? Oh, okay. Very good. No, and I think this is good. I think one of the neat things is that I learn of new artists, even just being here. There are Lithuanian artists that I'm meeting at my booth. It's amazing how many different artists I can be connected to, and having that connection. Because a lot of times I am asking, like, what would a pigeon say to another pigeon? And the pigeons here in Vilnius are very similar to the ones in New York. They're looking for French fries, really, almost all the time. That's what they do.
I go back to the world building principle that you started with, let's say, one comic. So you had this one comic, and then it worked well, and then a second and the third one. Do you feel you were conscious in, I would call it like world building through piggybacking? You know, one comic after the next one, you're actually building a world, but you're not sitting and drawing it or figuring it out.
Right. I was in Rob's session just before this, and he was talking about cyanide and happiness. And Rob said that they've destroyed planet Earth 11 times throughout the course of their comic. So there might be some inconsistency if you're thinking, oh, Earth has already been destroyed. It's like it's brand new again. Where I grew up in the United States, Muppets were like that. As a kid, Muppet Babies was a cartoon. Has anyone heard of Muppet Babies? Anyway, okay, yeah. Muppet Babies was a cartoon that had completely different lore than the Muppets that you see, the adult Muppets. So the Muppet Babies were babies together, and Nanny was taking care of them. But then when you watch the Muppet movie, Kermit and Fozzie are kind of meeting all these Muppets, and it's like, these are not the same worlds at all. But that's what's so neat. I think when you're building one by one, you don't have to be consistent.
Right.
Consistency is something you can kind of retcon, as people say.
Yeah.
Star Wars goes back and says, oh, this is why the Death Star got blown up. That's very normal. And at the highest level, creators are doing that. So.
Yeah. I think another example is the Moomins. It's very popular. And she was basically retconning one book after the next, like, oh, this one is the sister of this one. Actually, it's the mom. No, actually, it's the friend. Actually, it's the cousin.
Yeah.
And no one bats an eye as long as each story kind of holds itself.
If you're enjoying it, it's great. Yeah. So don't hesitate. Yeah.
But do you feel, for example, that this versatility gets, for example, it gets more problematic when you have the TV show?
Sure.
People are kind of waiting. Okay, this happened.
Yes.
So I'm expecting that to happen next.
Yeah, and when you make a TV show, at the very least, you must draw a city or draw a setting. You have to say, all right, these beings live here. And up until this moment, I had not had to draw that. They could live anywhere. They were all over the place. So that was really fun making a TV show and thinking about questions like, how do they die? How often is a being dying? Do they have lifespans like our lifespan? All those questions have to come into the TV show to think about that. Yeah.
And thinking about the TV show, one of the strengths of the comic is the pacing in which people can take their time with the words.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, it must have been for sure like the biggest challenge for you. Like, whoa, now I'm imposing a reading time to people. And if they don't pay attention for 1 second, what did the being said? Because in it's really, even the way you write the words are really like beautiful. We are looking at it, I see like prints are being sold.
Sure.
It's the whole thing is one unit with the words and with this like slow rhythm.
Right.
Of everyone can go at their own pace. But with a TV show, you're imposing on people the pace.
Right.
How did that feel for you to lose, for example, the focus on the words and have it to obviously have a focus on the story?
Yes. I think one of the questions that you're asking essentially is, did you change the way you write? Which we did. We did change the way. We didn't use as much of what we called exospeak. We just came up with that word for it, basically. The exospeak is saying sunburn is star damage. So star damage is one example of exospeak. We can't use too many of them if we're not showing what we're referring to. So we have to be visual, have to show that you're in a roll machine that's a car, have to show the roll machine if you say the word roll machine,
right,
so that the viewer is not trying to catch up. And it is hard. You don't want to lose viewers, but you don't want to have fans who know the words really well to be bored or to feel like this is very juvenile for children.
So you must have asked your question, like if I'm have to tone down this whole linguistic play,
right?
What else is there that can make 25 minutes times 10?
Yes. Well, emotions is what we focus on. So in the first episode, there's a flying machine, and the German fans of Strange Planet did reach out to me and said, flying machine is basically our word for airplane.
Flugzeug, yeah.
Yeah. So I said, I thank you. Yes, I did know that. And there are a lot of German or Finnish or other words from compounding words that actually work really well in a Strange Planet context when we don't necessarily use the words the same way in English, especially American English. So what we had decided to do is think about emotions. When you're on an airplane, you're not just flying, you're also managing your own embarrassment. You don't want to be ashamed. Essentially, if you're very afraid of flying, you hold in that fear sometimes. Those are the kinds of things that happen. So that's in the first episode. We talk about letting that fear out. I was on a plane from Canada to U.S. last week, and there was quite a bit of turbulence. And I saw the man next to me gripping the tray table really hard, but he was smiling the whole time. So I think there's always that juxtaposition that you can see visually. People are maybe trying to present one emotion with their face, but the rest of the body is different. So
I thought of that actually when trying to think what was the other topic within Strange Planet that maybe wasn't there in the beginning, but that you allowed to develop. And this realm of emotion really has to do with the language.
Yes.
Because being able, it's the whole thing with therapy, being able to process, to put words on things that we're feeling is bringing from the subconscious to the conscious.
Right.
And so without language, we are completely victim of emotions.
Yes.
So it's interesting to then bring this. The other thing is, of course, you communicate. If you say, I feel sad, but you're just alone, you will also feel sad and lonely.
Right.
If you're with a friend and you say, I feel sad, you're not only bringing it out, you're also probably like sharing maybe the weight.
Yeah.
Which means something good can happen out of it.
Yes, and the weight of emotion, to carry emotion together, is impossible without that bridge between you and me for you to know how I'm feeling, or vice versa.
Exactly.
So what I like about German, again, I go back to German, is in English we don't have a word to say, I really enjoy watching someone else fail. I really enjoy watching someone else struggle. But in German they do. And I think there's a lot of neat languages that have those words that we could really use. And we do. We just borrow them all the time in English.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we talked yesterday. My wife is Finnish, so I do have some Finnish language. And indeed, lentokone is like Finnish airplane. It's like flying machine.
Right.
Just in German. These are languages that are very pragmatic. It's like, well, it's a machine and it flies.
That's what it is.
Is there any other word?
I think a cat in a tree is basically a squirrel or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things like that where here's the animal, here's the location. That's a tree cat. Great.
But actually, English, French, language like that, if you don't need to go that far to find, again, for example, the bus. Someone that was mentioned that this was a group rolling machine, or
yes, yeah, a group roll machine for a
so
bus.
I had to think 1 second, like, wait a minute, where does bus come from?
Right.
So bus comes from omnibus, which means for everyone.
There you go. I did not know that.
And so that's your group.
Yeah.
But it was for carriage. It used to be for like big carriage that you just hop in the carriage and then hop out. And the fact that it's motorized doesn't really matter in that word.
It's about the group of people.
We lost some of the meaning, but we kept some of what was just a very pragmatic thing.
Yeah.
Like the orb kicking activity. Actually, when you have football,
yes, it's the same thing. Yeah.
And handball, it's already. Although orb kicking means there's an action. The other one is just like two things.
Right.
Flying machine is more interesting because there's an action.
Yes.
It's not the machine that could fly. It's the currently flying. Parent also. You had life giver to replace the word parent. But if you go back, I had to go back to Latin roots, which is parere, which means to birth.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So parent literally means the one that produced the next one.
That makes sense.
And we're back to life giver. Another one here that one of your subtitles is existence is absurd.
Yes.
And so I like this one because, again, I like to think, wait, absurd is a very strong word that we use a lot.
Yes.
Where does it come? What I think the colloquial meaning would be meaningless.
Right.
But going back to Latin, absurdus, surdus means it's out of tune.
Oh, interesting.
French sourd means deaf.
Yeah.
So that means we are doing something without hearing.
Interesting.
And I thought that was really interesting because it's not meaningless anymore. It just means there's a meaning here, but they do not sing together.
We don't have the sense to understand.
And I want to ask, do you think it's about absurdity of existence, let's say the comic itself?
Yes.
Or, and I'm going to be a bit pedant here, absurdity of the language in the face of experience?
Sure. I do think absurdity of existence is the bedrock of Strange Planet. So when we are here together, if you had been in the last session, at the end, everyone was slapping their hands together. It's something to show Rob that we enjoyed what you did. We slapped our hands together. These things are meaningful because of the shared idea that, oh yes, I've seen people slap their hands together before. But when you start to examine it and you say it over and over again, it starts to feel absurd. And so I think the absurdity is kind of in some ways, it's not real. The absurdity is not actually there. It feels absurd, and life often feels absurd, and perhaps that would have been a better title. But it's meaningful. Just people listening to someone talk, they want to show thank you. They want to say thank you without just shouting thank you and thank you, thank you. That would be strange.
So you're enjoying the lightness of the social contract that we have.
Right. It's a social contract. When I wrote one comic about drive-through, how do you say drive-through here? Do you say drive-through? Picking food up from a restaurant and you just drive through. Yeah. And the idea is there's this mistrust between both sides.
Yeah.
You have to pay before you get the food. And then when you get the food, you look to see if they gave you the food. And there's mistrust, and that's normal. And there are people working very hard at the restaurant. So it's a hard job. But there is obviously some mistrust because you think, well, just want to make sure everything goes the way we're supposed to.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm thinking also in concerts, sometimes if you don't have like the smoke and all that stuff, and you imagine, okay, let's just remove the sound here.
Right.
We're all just standing there looking at a bunch of guys
right.
doing absolutely nothing. And like they should say, like, why are you looking at us?
Yes.
You just cut the sound off and it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right. And as you're saying, if there is if there's a loss of connection there, if the absurdity comes to the forefront, for sure.
Yeah. It's there's a meme like that where a person is trying to nail the sea.
Yes.
You know, the sea is coming, the wind is nailing the waves, and over the person it's like humanity, the sea is existence, and then the nailing is language.
Sure. It's impossible to map language perfectly onto our experience.
And at the same time, language gives meaning. Another, I think, topic, general or theme in Strange Planet would be curiosity.
Sure.
And then exploration, which is curiosity put into experience.
Right.
Is it still absurd if, you know, there's an inner drive that then we can be spiritual about it, or we can be just like very secular about it. But there's a drive that says, hey, I want to know what's happening.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, it's very imperfect. I have language. I have maybe my language, someone else's language, every language. But I'm still building something.
Yeah.
And so do you feel, for example, that the cartoon format would allow this curiosity and experience to develop a bit more than, for example, in a 4-panel format?
Sorry, could you repeat that one? Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to make it more simple.
Yeah, sure.
Like this. Are you able to develop a story arc, for example, where experience starts to take in, and it's not always the like first degree of curiosity? Like
sure. Yeah, and I think one example would be meeting someone. There's several stories in the show where someone meets another being, one being meets another, and there's no spark of friendship. There's no spark of interest there. But I think we've all been in a situation where you have some meaningful experience together with another stranger or an acquaintance, and you realize, oh, actually, we're connected really well. In some cases, it's simply, I remember this very old TV show that you also remember. Could be really simple, but because you've both been carrying that memory together, you realize the experience of the friendship has taken a paradigm shift. We shift paradigms constantly when we talk with someone and realize we're actually very similar. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes I would feel there's a downside to, or not reverse, just a kind of sad realization when you are with some, let's say, friends or family members, and you realize that you can only connect through that thing of the past.
Right.
And whatever discussion or something that, this made me think of you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happened, and I'm like, it's a thing I was into maybe 20 years ago.
No, it happens.
We are incapable of communicating in the present, and it's a bit sad because we can't bridge that again.
Yes. And loss of friendship is one of the hardest parts of being an adult, I would say, because it often is a slow wilting instead of a sudden cutoff. And it just makes you sad. But that's part of existing. We don't have the same friends now than we did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking of the medium, when you have the animated, of course, you have there's a studio working.
Yeah.
Who's writing the screenplay, for example?
We hired a writing room, and many people in that writing room had come from various other kinds of writing. So Dan Harmon, who I co-created the show with, had made Community and Rick and Morty, obviously many other things, but those are two of the most famous. So a lot of the people we wrote with also had come some connection to something Dan had done, because Dan knew those writers really well, and I didn't know the TV writing world as well. So that was neat, because we were able to come up with ideas, and in that case, it was at the height of Zoom meetings.
Right.
So there were people from all over the planet who could chime in and just have to meet at a certain time when they could actually meet with us. It was really good. And I do think Strange Planet still has many many miles to go in terms of making it more global. I'll make comics about Strange Planet, and someone in the comments will say, that's a very American thing you've said, or it's a very American experience. And I realize that probably makes sense. I'm an American. So coming to Lithuania, eating the pink soup and all the things I've done here, all those things build more of a global, more of a cosmopolitan mind that I can write into the comics. Yeah.
So for some people, just reading your comics makes them already feel alien.
Right.
Like, oh, that's an American thing to do.
Yeah, that was an American thing you just referred to. Yeah.
Right. It happens also. Yeah, sometimes I feel very connected to, let's say, certain. I'm from illustration background, so listening to illustrator like podcast, for example.
Yeah.
And then they tell you about driving cars, and they say, "Oh, of course, there is no other way to go than driving your car to work." And I'm like,
very sad. Yeah.
The European.
Right.
Is there really nothing else than a car to go from A to B? But for that person, it was like strict. And then you realize, like, okay, here's a interesting cultural shift. But in the same conversation, where 99% of everything else is perfectly clear.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's interesting like that. I wanted to ask about screenplay because I would like to know do you have other people, for example, that can input?
Yeah.
Even a concrete example, can they say, hey, how about calling that thing?
Oh, yes.
Can they suggest new?
They did.
Call it exospeak.
Yeah, they did exospeak. So
how do you feel about that?
In this case, the phone, we talked a lot about what should this be called? Because phone is such a minimalist word for this. We do so much more with it. And one of our writers, he's actually a rap artist. His name is Open Mike Eagle, and he came up with machine face. So this is machine face, and I think it actually works really well. We actually interact with many of our friends strictly through that. That's the face we have for that friend. And I think it's interesting now because a lot of my closest friends are ones I don't see them. I don't come to where they are very often, but they're my closest friends. And that's the way that the world has changed. We have machine faces, we have real faces. And obviously there's a disconnect. I don't know if you've ever done this, but have you ever met someone in real life who was nothing like they were online? That is part of what I think machine face communicated really well. This person is very boisterous online on the internet, but when you meet them in real life, they're reserved and quiet, or vice versa. It can really be surprising.
Yeah. The Finnish word is puhelin, which is like talker.
Okay, the talker, yes.
Machine that talks.
Yes, the machine that talks.
So that's a bit already outdated, I guess.
Right.
Now you added the face part.
Yeah.
There used to be phones without knowing the face of the person.
I remember it well. So I'm 42, so I grew up in the real thick of the internet becoming a thing and all those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember too. Turning the numbers and stuff.
Yes, you had to turn. Did anyone else turn the numbers? Yeah. Oh, it's a workout. Someone had a 0 in their phone number. It was the worst. Yeah.
One thing we haven't talked about, those characters are, I know they're nameless, and that was an issue for the, the TV show.
Tricky.
I would just like to talk about this non-descriptiveness of it, because of course it's a very, how can I say, it was very clear. Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics, he has several pages about this.
Yeah.
And even making a graph like how universal your character can be, and then how extremely specific, like a real person from history.
Right.
And you work with Dan Harmon, who kind of poked fun at that in Community.
Right.
Remember the Greendale human beings?
Yes.
So that was a moment where using a nondescript figure was almost put to the test. Like how far can you go until it just gets weird?
How generic can it be? Yes.
And on the other hand, for example, I thought of Jeff Smith's Bone, the comic, where he uses it in this more well-defined, like, okay, here's a blank figure, just put yourself in. But in his setting, other characters were very well-defined.
Yeah.
For example, there was a whole, let's say, very heavily described woman character.
Yeah.
In all the details, like, look, she's an attractive woman, but this is a blank character. So it forces people to, put themselves into one type of person.
Right.
Were you conscious about, for example, those examples that I mentioned, when they started to be these genderless, nondescript beings?
Yeah. I would say Mario Kart or Super Smash Brothers.
That's a great example.
There are a lot of great examples of me, and I'm watching. I'm Princess Peach, right? And my brother is Link, or my brother is Samus. You know, you look at Princess Peach getting beat up because my brother's much better than I am, and you think that's me. Princess Peach is getting beat up. I think video games have given us that sense that like you can see yourself in any avatar. Oh, that's me. I'm right there. I'm losing this Mario Kart race or whatever, and I'm disappointed. Princess Peach is disappointed. All those things. It's a really neat thing that video games have built into our brains that I can be represented by something that looks nothing like me. It maybe has very little in common with me, but I think the beings were an example of I want someone to be able to see a being and say, that's what I feel like. I feel like that being. So eyes and mouth are the most prominent parts of the being. And those, I think, are the most expressive parts of anyone's emotional countenance, right? Eyes and the mouth, obviously, with the hands and the arms. So that was what we wanted. We wanted emotions to be the thing that connected someone, a viewer, to a being. And it was okay that they were looking all very similar. I actually liked it. And Dan agreed. Dan Harmon said, you probably should keep it the way it was in the comic. They all look the same. Because once you start to change little aspects of them, it's a long, slippery slope, basically, to making them all completely different. So, yeah.
One has freckles, unless I'm wrong.
Yes. And so we pushed into that question of like, could they have freckles? Could they have tattoos? Could they have a birthmark? All those things that I said, all right, I think freckles are okay. But it was always a judgment call. It was subjective, you know.
Right. And do they distinguish themselves by a certain character of
right?
Do you feel that they embody a different emotion, for example, or at least a set of emotion that then gets to interact with other emotions?
I think also having a backstory. I think when you watch a show, you learn about a backstory, so that when you see two characters, you don't simply think, "Oh, they both look very similar." You think, "Oh, this one, they've moved to a new country, they're moved to a new world. This one is very tired because they have a very busy job, a lot of responsibility." Right. So there are little things that you can see visually about the differences. Yeah.
Right. And how far can you go